We all know that there are warning lights on the dashboard of our car. I especially know that because I like to run on empty often.
You see those lights all the time?
All the time, and the little red dot still doesn't stop me from doing it. But today we want to talk about what are the warning lights on the dashboard of our marriage to be flashing to let us know, hey, you need to take time to get healthy.
Welcome back to the Ferguson home. We're so glad that you're with us today. I want to thank everybody who took time last week to subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us when you click that subscribe button and you join us for future videos. And so if you'll take just a minute and subscribe, we would appreciate that. And let's jump in to our conversation today, Barie, about the warning lights we want to watch out for in our marriage. What are a few of those warning lights?
Yeah, the first one that came to mind immediately when we were talking about this is isolation. And that can take on different forms, but you know, after we have counseled a lot of people just from me being a pastor, and then many of y'all know that we have led the ReEngage ministry, marriage ministry at our church for 5 years, that we see patterns. Yeah. And one of the first patterns that is super common, not all the time, but is that for whatever reason, one or both of you get upset with somebody in your community, and so that gives you an excuse to pull away. So we're actually next week going to focus on how COVID has caused some isolation and that's impact. So definitely come back for next week, part 2. But isolation can come in different forms. It doesn't have to just be because of COVID. And so for whatever reason, you get upset with someone around you or in your community, or just life, busyness of life. Maybe it's not being upset with someone, but your kids' schedules can get you where you end up pulling back from small group involvement or just your community that you're used to doing life with. You pull back and you start doing things just you and your spouse to where there's no one around you to notice.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask is why would you say? I mean, like you said, there's a pattern that we see that people tend to go down. There's a road they tend to go down on the way to marriage struggles and separation and divorce. But isolation may not be one that people normally think of as a part of that. Well, as a part of that journey. Like, why would isolation cause marriage problems? So, I guess talk about that a little bit about why do we see that cause marriages to get in trouble when they isolate from community?
Well, I think one of the big things is that you start thinking that you're the only ones that have that problem because you're not talking about it with anyone. It kind of, when you're isolated, you start trying to figure out problems on your own and solving them on our own. And I just think we're not built for that. So just like when you get around with even just yourself, you're with a sinner. And so when you get in a marriage relationship and there's two people who are both imperfect people trying to solve life's problems together without anybody to just run stuff by, you can find yourself in a world of hurt.
Yeah, I think about Hebrews 10, 23 to 25. It talks about let us consider how we can spur one another on toward love and good deeds, and how easy it is when you get isolated. You don't have anybody around you that's encouraging you in your marriage. Nobody to encourage you to keep fighting, keep working on it. And a lot of times what we see, even in our own lives, when we get isolated, is our blind spots end up really creeping up on us and causing us problems because nobody's in our lives that's holding the mirror up to us and saying, hey, you seem like, I've thought about times in my journey where somebody's said to me, hey, it seemed like you were a little bit harsh with Barie in that moment, or you were doing that. And I'm like, oh man, I didn't even see that, and I'd come back and apologize. But if you're isolated, you're not getting any of that feedback. You're not getting any encouragement or help or just love around you that's pushing you to continue to work on your marriage.
Yeah, and I think one of the scariest parts of this is that typically people who are isolated don't see it as a problem. They don't see it that they're on a path that could lead to marriage problems in the future, because we live in a society where we prioritize and we love and esteem and value our individuality. And, you know, like we can do things ourselves and we don't need help and we can make our own decisions and we're not going to submit to authority. You know, we create our own rules and follow them. So all of that stuff kind of feeds that it's okay to be where we're at. And I think too, if you're the family, the couple that you're investing all of your energy into your kids and their sports and you're taking, you can feel very good about that. Like we are making a worthy investment in our kids. And I'm not saying you're not, but what I'm saying is that your marriage is paying a price. And though you might not feel it in the moment right now, we're just letting you know that we have seen so many times to where if you continue that pattern of isolating from people or just being focused on your kids where you're isolating even from your spouse, it doesn't end well.
That's really good. So watch that gauge. If you think of one side of the gauge as we are connected in authentic community, and the other side of the gauge on empty is you're fully isolated and nobody knows what's going on in your life. So watch that gauge. And if you as a couple find yourself getting more and more isolated, that's a warning light. Like, be aware of that, watch out for that. What's the second one we wanted to share about today?
The second one is being just if you find yourself that you are disappointed with your spouse more often than not. So what does that look like?
Well, as you and I have talked about, we can get an unhealthy cycle sometimes in our marriage where we're looking to each other to make us happy. It's like, I'm putting all this pressure on you to keep me happy, or you're putting pressure on me to do that. And we just can't meet each other's expectations, and then we just find ourselves disappointed. And the way that shows up for me is when I'm disappointed with you and I'm looking to you to fix something in my life that's not your responsibility to fix, is I end up getting critical or kind of upset with you about small things that are like not big deals, but it's because of this bigger issue where I'm just feeling like you're not meeting this need that I have, and that's dangerous in a marriage. Yes,
I think you said it all.
Well, and I think we just want to encourage people that if you're watching this gauge of really enjoying each other on one side and not putting a lot of pressure on each other to fulfill one another, but on the other side of the gauge is you're just chronically disappointed in your spouse and everything they do tends to let you down and nothing they do tends to make you happy, like that's a warning light. You need to watch out for that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we say all the time to people is to think the best about each other. And so that's so important in a marriage. Well, if you're disappointed with somebody chronically, you're not thinking the best about them. You're thinking the worst about their motive or their action, why they did stuff. And so that's why it's just super important that if you find yourself disappointed, also that might play out that you might just find yourself arguing with your spouse all the time. So if you have a very argumentative relationship,
check your heart in there.
Check your heart, because that's an indicator that there's underlying disappointment, a root of bitterness has taken place, which nothing good comes out of that, the root of bitterness. So and then the third one, talk to us about, we had just put down lack of communication. So talk about that.
Well, one of the things that always leads to trouble in a marriage relationship is when you stop communicating at a deep level with your spouse. Like, you don't get to the heart level, you don't get to the inner world with each other, and those conversations with your spouse become just transactional. Are you picking up the kids? Am I picking up the kids? What time is this thing? Are we bringing something to that meal? Whatever. And it just becomes business. People talk about, like, I feel like I'm in a business partnership or relationship. And what happens, the reason you got to watch out for that is because that emotional connection will fall somewhere. Even if you're an introverted person, you're going to find somewhere. Because
we were made for community.
We're made for that emotional connection to happen somewhere. And even if you don't like big crowds of people, you might have one person at work that you connect with and you sit down and you share your heart with them, Or you might go online to do it. I mean, we've talked to a lot of people who are like, I'm connecting with this old friend from high school and we're sharing deeply or whatever. And so that is definitely a warning light you want to watch out for, is if you are emotionally not connecting with your spouse, but emotionally connecting with someone outside of your marriage, and that communication is out of balance, you're on thin ice.
Yeah, one of the weeks at ReEngage, we do this Q&A, and thus where this kind of got started, because the reason oftentimes why there's a lack of communication, is that there's a lot of feelings and hurt involved in certain topics between couples. And so I think most couples, we've come to with different topics, you just almost don't want to go there.
That's right.
Because it just takes a lot of emotional energy. And typically we're so busy and we're so tired at night, we just don't want to deal with that. So what's the phrase, like, stuff it under the rug? You just keep stuffing because you just don't want to go there because it's too heavy. But see, you can go there with those conversations with people who aren't that vested, right? In it.
That somebody else might be a safe place to share that emotion. Yeah.
And so, we've seen that happen. So say that you're struggling with your sex life in your marriage, which is just so common. So first of all, don't believe the lie that it's just your marriage. It's super common. But then what happens is there's just a lot of vulnerability involved in that. Hurt. There's a lot of hurt. There's wounds that are there. And especially the longer you go without talking about it, it just gets more awkward to bring it up. So then if you go, it's much easier, specifically in regards to your sexual relationship, to go talk to somebody else about that. And that's where it can be really dangerous. And it could be finances. Maybe you've fought over finances so many times that you just stopped. And then maybe the husband goes and gripes to his people, his friends, about, my wife just spends a lot of money, or vice versa. It could be, the wife saying, I can't stand a budget but whatever, but you don't talk about it with each other. And you just stop communicating, and you find someone else who is a safe place, but that doesn't end well.
Yeah, absolutely. Ever. So on that one, you want to watch the gauge. On one side would be you're emotionally connected to your spouse and you have open and honest communication, even around tough topics. And on the empty side of the gauge, you want to watch out for being emotionally disconnected and your communication is broken around sensitive topics, and you're having those conversations with people outside of your marriage, but not inside your marriage. So 3 warning lights we've given you to think about today. One is isolation. Watch out for that. If you find yourself isolated, you could be in trouble or bringing trouble into your marriage. Second is if you're chronically disappointed with your spouse, always frustrated and upset with what they're doing or not doing, that's a warning light. And then third is if you're not having open and honest, deep emotional conversations with your spouse, but you are having those conversations somewhere else, that can be a warning light as well. And so we wanted to say, if those warning lights are tipping toward the dangerous area, what is something people could do? We talked about inviting people to ReEngage and to join us.
Yes, and for those of you who are in the Round Rock area, we for sure would love to invite you. Our starts in August, and signups are going strong right now on the Cityview, it's cityview.church, right? So you can get on there and register, and we will have space for you if you will get registered, and it's worth it. It's 17 weeks where you're getting to focus on these conversations in a safe place. Like, we kind of help give you the ground rules to make it a very safe space to have these hard conversations. So, but if you're not local, ReEngage is all over the United States and even some around the world. So you can get on the ReEngage website and you can locate one close to you. So we would for sure push that, because we just have seen so much benefit in tons and tons and tons of marriages. But then there's also counseling. There's so many options. But find a small group. I would say find people who love the Lord and who will lead you and to fight for your marriage. Don't just surround yourself with people who will agree with you and tell you keep doing what you're doing, because we need people around us to say, no, actually that's not healthy.
Totally. And we see that all the time, where people go to a friend and we are looking for an ear, somebody to listen to our hurts and our complaints, and really want to feel justified in why we're angry at our spouse.
And this is extra, this isn't a part of it, but also do not go to your parents, because then everything we pray will work out, and then your parents are still holding the grudge. So let's just say encouraging things about our spouse to our parents.
That's so good. That's so good. Well, we love y'all, and our prayer for you, God's desire for you is that your marriage would not end in divorce. And so we want you to have just some insight on some of these warning lights to watch out for, and to know, as Barie said, take a step toward health in these areas. And we just hope and pray for you that your marriage will continue to go strong.